Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining. Alhamdulillah, it's good to see everyone commenting. Jazakallah khair. Today, I want to just talk about Alasna Institute. Hopefully, you've seen the announcement already. This is something that we launched just this week, alhamdulillah, and everything has gone very well so far. And I just want to give you some insight into why we started this, what's the purpose, what really you can expect if you decide to enroll in our courses. And I just want to talk to you in general, answer some Q&A. I haven't really done much Q&A and anything live. Really, video has been something that's hasn't been something I've done much of in the past 3 years or so that I've been on social media. But inshallah, I want to start doing a lot more of that. And in fact, I am planning to, inshallah, have a weekly live Q&A on Facebook as well as YouTube, and just have it dedicated to talking about a lot of the news that's been going on for that particular week. And also go over some of the articles that I've published on muslimskeptic.com, which I've been much more active in updating as opposed to writing on Facebook directly. And then also, answering Q&A, get people thinking about what I think are important issues and thinking in a kind of way that I think is important for Muslims to do. There's so much going on, so much news happening in the world, and oftentimes I feel that some Muslims don't really have the right perspective or understanding given Islamic ethics, Islamic values, aqidah, and so forth. So, whatever I can contribute based on my knowledge, then I'm happy to do that. And I think that I've been writing for over 5 years. I've been on social media for about 3 years. And in that time, I've published over 1,000 posts, and a lot of them are pretty long. And I've actually calculated the word count, and it's the equivalent of having, 3 full books, 300, 400 page books. So that's, one medium that I've used, and alhamdulillah, it's been really, fulfilling for me to be able to do that, to be able to write. And I've been doing it kind of as a part-time thing, as well as working full-time for a company out of the Bay Area. But now I want to focus full-time on this new institute, Alasna. And I think posts are limited. I think social media is limited. It has its strengths. You can quickly get awareness for an issue and increase awareness in the Muslim community on a specific kind of issue or topic. So that's good. You can reach a lot of people in that way, but it's limited because the weakness is that you don't get much depth. You don't get much insight, deeper insight, and also you can't really build. You can't really build over time. You're just addressing an issue, and then some people see it, other people don't. And then if you post next week on the same issue, you can't assume that the people who are going to see it in that current week will remember or understand, or maybe they didn't even see what you posted last week. So you can't grow, and you can't take people in a very systematic way, step by step, to get them to understand certain things or certain ideas that are important to understand when it comes to some of these ideologies. I think a lot of people, for example, even people who really follow my posts, they might not even really understand what the critique of feminism is, right? Feminism and the women's rights movement. So people will see a certain post, it'll turn them off. They will kind of project their own issues or their own ideas about what feminism means or women's rights means, and then read it in that light, and then be very critical or be turned off. And they won't realize that I've been writing about this issue for many years, long essays, short posts. I've done, lectures on this topic. So they'll just see that one post and not understand the larger context of what's being said, or not understand the larger topic of discussion. So that's something that I hope to be able to address through an institute, Alasna, and really have courses that take you step by step. And that's what I've taught some of the courses that will be on Alasna, inshallah, and currently some of them are. So I've developed an entire curriculum that does this. It goes from the very basics of modernity. What is modernity? What is modernism? Where does it come from? How is it posing a challenge to Islam? What is the danger to Muslims in terms of their faith, and also physical danger because of things like colonialism and imperialism, things that have happened for the past couple of centuries up until this day, starting from certain ideas and tools that you need, and then building on that, going into talking about liberalism, talking about scientism, looking at how science, what really is the relationship between Islam and science. I think that this is something that's very important, and my specialty actually when I did a master's in philosophy was the philosophy of science. So this is something that I'm very interested in. I have done graduate work on it. But I think that there are a lot of insights and ideas that Muslims should be grappling with and talking about and thinking about and writing about in a very principled way that doesn't undermine our aqidah, doesn't undermine our theology, doesn't undermine our beliefs and our values and ethics. I think that's very, very critical, and that's really the bedrock or the basis of everything that I try to do in my writing and my work. So alhamdulillah, Alasna, like I said, there's weaknesses that social media has, and I've been frustrated by social media in different ways over the years, but I want to be able to contribute myself and my wife to improving Muslim literacy and education on these important issues. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. What else did I want to say? Yeah, so with Alasna, I'll tell you a little bit about what Alasna means. This is actually a statement of Umar radiallahu anh, who, when he became Muslim, when he first became Muslim, this is something that he asked the Prophet ﷺ, Alasna ala al-haq, are we not on the truth? And he was saying this to encourage and to motivate the Muslims who were just in Mecca at the time, a small community still growing, to actually go and pray publicly in the Haram. And so he wanted to know, well, we're Muslims, we shouldn't be hiding. We have the truth, we have the haqq. So we have to be able to have the kind of izzah, the honor of being Muslim, to go out and proudly, speak the truth and show everyone that this is the truth. And that's part of calling to Islam. If you don't believe, or you don't really confidently feel that you're on the truth, then you're not going to be motivated to go out and to spread that or to talk to people confidently. You're going to have a tendency to want to hide Islam, or you want to constantly appease others or apologize for Islam. And so this is something that unfortunately we do see in the Muslim community. We have seen it for, since the beginning of colonization over 200 years ago. And it's a big problem because it creates crises of faith, and it creates problems in aqidah, creates problems in iman, where a Muslim doesn't even recognize the problems with their beliefs, because they've just assumed that what they believe, they just take for granted that what they believe is actually conformant with Islam and is actually correct aqidah and so forth. So this is a big problem. And Alasna, the whole spirit of it is that, yes, we're on the haqq. Why are we hiding it? Why are we apologizing for it? Why are we trying to, in ways that are inappropriate and takes us, in some cases, outside the fold of Islam, why are we trying to align Islam or meld Islam with some of these very incorrect, problematic ideologies? Liberalism, secularism, feminism, the sexual revolution, sexual ethics, liberal sexual ethics, and so forth. So this is something that has caused a huge problem. I'll give you one example with LGBT. And this is an issue that I've written about very often, and there's a reason for it, because I'm seeing so many Muslims in the West who are just very blasé, and they've accepted this idea of, yeah, we need to support LGBT rights. We need to support, and saying things like, oh, my best friends are LGBT, and this is something that Muslims have to support, and we're going to march for it, and we're going to tweet about it. And it's very problematic, and people don't understand how that can affect the iman of a young Muslim teenager who might not know some of the basic values, some of the basic principles regarding liwat, regarding same-sex behavior, same-sex relations, and how this is something strictly prohibited and something that is a major crime, fahisha, in the sight of Allah. And there's a reason why Allah spends, in over 8 surah, 8 chapters of the Quran, Allah is mentioning what has happened to Qawm Lut and the punishment of Qawm Lut. So this is something that, if you truly have internalized and you've truly understood the story of Lut alayhi salam, of his people, what happened to his people, then how can you think that, oh, okay, well, this is happening in our society, this is something that is acceptable in American society or Canadian society, the West in general, and yeah, there's no problem with it, we should be, supporting that. I mean, do we want to suffer the same fate? Like, do we want to suffer the same consequences of Qawm Lut? So how can you reconcile that Quranic narrative, that Quranic history that we know and we read in the Quran, with this kind of attitude of LGBT rights and Muslims need to support and march and all of this? So this is just an example of, Pew has done polling on this. What percentage of the American Muslim community accepts same-sex marriage and thinks that there's nothing wrong morally with same-sex marriage? And they claim that 50% of the American Muslim community accepts LGBT or accepts same-sex marriage. Allahu alam if that's correct, if it's really 50%. But as far as my experience and what I've seen through my family, through different social contacts, and also through social media, the way that some Muslim figures have discussed this issue or not discussed this issue, there is cause for concern. This is something that is going to grow, especially with the younger generations, unless there is a response to it. So there's different ways. So LGBT is just an example of something that challenges Islamic values and ethics and aqidah and so forth. And it's coming from a modernist paradigm, a modernist frame of thought. So how do we address this kind of challenge, this kind of conflict? And there's 2 general approaches. One approach, which I think is a disaster, is to say that, oh, look, this is not really an issue. This is not really a conflict. This is not something that is going to cause any trouble for Muslims. We can, just ignore it. Or, some will go so far as to say, yeah, what's wrong with same-sex behavior, maybe the story in the Quran, the history mentioned in the Quran, this is about rape, for example. This is what some of the progressives say in trying to make the haram halal and say that same-sex behavior is actually acceptable in Islam. So they'll give different kinds of ways of justification to say, oh no, Islam doesn't conflict with what is accepted, what is the dominant paradigm, what's the dominant framework, the dominant worldview. Islam doesn't conflict with that. Islam is perfectly in conformity. There's no problem at all between these two, between Islam and this aspect of modern culture. So that's one approach, and there's very different ways to do this. LGBT is one example. Another example is the issue of apostasy and the had for irtidad, for one to be a Muslim and then leave Islam. And this is something that I've talked about, I've written about before. But one approach, the wrong approach, is to say that, oh, well, this is something that has been misinterpreted in the Islamic tradition, or it's something where the ulama for 1400 years, they made a mistake. They really didn't understand the nusus, the Quran and the hadith on the topic. Or they'll say something like, well, now we're in a completely different world and things have changed. I mean, no doubt, context is very important as far as the Sharia is concerned, and as far as implementing Islamic law in general. So no doubt about that. There's no question about that. And there are nuances here that I don't want us to forego. But my point is that the core moral issue, the core moral conflict between the modernist view of things like freedom of religion and so forth, and the conflict between that and Islam and Islamic law, specifically when it comes to this had, when it comes to apostasy, irtidad. So one approach is to just dissolve the conflict. Oh, there's no conflict at all. Okay? I think that unfortunately, some other institutions, some other type of groups that are trying to address doubts or trying to address modern issues like this is the approach that they take. They essentially throw the scholarly tradition under the bus. They throw the ulama under the bus. And sometimes, I mean, this is a dangerous path, because it's a slippery slope. You're going to eventually be throwing the Quran under the bus. You're going to take what's qat'i, what's a definitive, clear cut within the Quran or within hadith, and you're going to start throwing this under the bus. So that's the wrong approach. The other approach, the approach that I've tried to exemplify in the work that I do, and the kind of approach that I've seen from my teachers, the kind of approach that I think that actually does address doubts and does correctly resolve them, is to say, well, why do we have such a problem with this had? Or why do we have such a problem? Or why do Muslims, the Muslims who have a problem with this, what is this problem coming from? Where is the doubt coming from? The shak, right? Or these shubuhat, where are they coming from? And when you take that kind of approach, it makes you more critical, where you actually are looking at the modern ideologies themselves, the sources of doubt. You have to look at, okay, well, we have this idea of religious freedom. What is that based on? Well, that's based on this conception of liberty. It's coming from this intellectual tradition, from these thinkers, and this is how it's developed over time. And this is the moral justification, the moral argument for something like religious freedom or sexual liberation or women's rights or whatever it may be, that's coming from modernist Enlightenment thought. You analyze that and then you critique it. And you do that with the confidence of Alasna ala al-haq. Are we not on the truth? Is this not the truth? Okay, if we ground ourselves in that, if we solidly ground ourselves within that truth and with the confidence, okay, this is where what does it, like we hear this expression, oh, I'm unapologetically Muslim. Oh, I'm unapologetically Muslim. Oh, we have confidence and we have conviction, all this lip service that we hear. What is that based on? Because if you have a building, a solid building, it has to have a foundation. It has to be built on something solid. And the source of solidity that Muslims should have is, of course, the Quran and Sunnah. But where is the Quran and Sunnah coming from? Where the Quran and Sunnah were not saved on a, like a flash drive or an external hard drive that we can just pick up and put in our laptops and, oh, now we have the Quran and Sunnah. No, the Quran and Sunnah were preserved and transmitted through a tradition, through a scholarly tradition. And this is why I'm constantly emphasizing the scholarly tradition and the importance of respecting ulama and not throwing them under the bus or making broad characterizations that, oh, they made mistakes and, oh, this and that. It's undoubtedly, not everything that every scholar has ever said is absolutely correct, because sometimes it can be mutually exclusive. There can be two scholars that disagree. But the point is that when you look at where there's unanimity, where there's consensus on issues across all of these scholars, okay, so those issues, you can't just be so casual and say, oh, well, they made a mistake, or, oh, this is not relevant to our time, or, oh, this is not something that we can really look towards in light of the modern, quote-unquote, modern world. When people say modern, they mean, the enlightened, the civilized, the peak of human progress. This is what the word modern connotes. And that's something that needs to be analyzed and deconstructed and so forth. And this is something that, all of Alasna is really about. This is what the courses do. And so that I just wanted to give you a taste of that kind of approach. I think it's a more compelling approach because you're grounding yourself. Oh, I was saying, about being unapologetically Muslim. Okay, unapologetic, what are you grounded in? Okay, if you're not grounded in something, if you're not based in, meaning based in something where you have a kind of appreciation and respect, and you understand that, okay, these boundaries have been set by the Islamic tradition and we're not going to cross them. We're not going to say something that contravenes that, because that's the source of our deen. And so that's if you're unapologetic, but you're constantly undermining the scholarly tradition, or you're constantly saying things or doing things that contradict what the ulama have said, you're constantly contradicting Islamic scholarship, okay, then what is your identity based on? It's just a cultural identity. It's just a political identity. You're unapologetic in that sense, but you're not grounded in anything meaningful or anything substantive. And you're certainly not grounded in Islam because you're constantly contravening the religious authorities of Islam. So these are the two kinds of approaches to addressing doubts. And obviously, I think that the first approach of trying to say that, oh, there's no conflict, that everything is honky-dory, everything is perfect, I think that is really the wrong approach. Okay. Let me look at some of these comments. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam to everyone. Thank you again for joining. So here's a question. We can start talking about more in depth about the structure of Alasna. And so someone's asking who will teach the courses. So I teach some of the courses. My wife, Khalid, teaches the courses related to marriage and homeschooling, child raising, anything that has to do with those kinds of topics. Also, some feminism. We have some great stuff that's planned out. We're going to co-teach some things as well. And in the future, there's going to be more teachers they'll come on board as well. So we're really excited about that. And what else? Yeah, so someone's asking if the materials offered are going to have a basis in things like usul al-fiqh or fiqh in general, aqidah. Yeah, of course. Everything that is covered in the courses, the whole point is as a defense or as a championing of the Islamic tradition, the championing of the rationality and the morality of the Islamic tradition, all of these Islamic sciences, all of this tradition that we have. And there have been, when I've taught the curriculum, there have been both students of knowledge and actual ulama who have taken the courses because they've wanted to understand modernity. They've wanted to understand these modern ideologies. They wanted to understand how these ideologies distort the mind and really distort our intuitions about right and wrong and rationality. They wanted to understand that. And so, I've had students who they're ulama themselves, and they say things like, alhamdulillah, now with this knowledge, now that I understand the way that these kinds of ideologies work, then I can not only better appreciate the Islamic tradition and see the wisdom in the Sharia, in Islamic ethics and so forth. I can also teach it better. I can also explain things without having to worry about apologizing for anything or being shy about teaching certain things. So like when I teach about something like, let's say, the had for zina, when I teach something like that, I'm trying to explain, like the actual fiqh of it is very simple. Like the fiqh of it is not that complicated. And when it comes to something like the hudud, it's not that complicated. And generally there's a consensus that certain kinds of sexual behaviors receive some punishment. Okay, yes, there's ikhtilaf on things like had versus ta'zir, or the different kinds of distinctions that the schools of thought made. Like those kinds of fiqh details are very important, and that's what you go to the madrasa to study. You go to Islamic institution to sit with shuyukh, to sit with ulama and study those details. But what I'm concerned with in my work and what the Institute is concerned with is with the conflict between a modern frame of thought and the idea that certain sexual behaviors, consensual sexual behaviors, according to Islamic law, according to the Sharia, according to the command from Allah, from our Creator, it punishes certain kinds of sexual behavior. So that aspect of Islamic ethics, Islamic law, there's a clear conflict between that and the way that modernists understand, well, sexual behavior, if it's between two consenting adults, what could be a problem with that? How could that be harmful, let alone something that is criminal, that should be punished, and so forth and so on. So there's a conflict there, and that's the kind of conflict that the Institute is meant to address, and it's meant to address it in a specific kind of way, where the point is, it's not only that Islam is what Islamic law, what the Sharia says about zina is, morally justifiable, right? It's morally passable, or maybe we can think of a way that this would be acceptable in a certain kind of context, but you have the modernist system, you have modern culture, and that's fine too. And you have Islam on the one hand, and you have modernist culture. They're both okay, Some people prefer chocolate, some people prefer vanilla. They're both options. This is not something that inspires confidence. This is not something that inspires conviction and iman for the average Muslim. Right? Because if you give those kinds of options, or you present those kinds of options or ideas, as you create this kind of equivalence to, for, like, let's say a more westernized millennial young Muslim, and you give them a choice, like, okay, fine, I'll choose the modernist culture. I'll choose that, every day of the week. Okay, that's what makes more sense to me. That's what appeals to me. That appeals to my sense of morality. So that's not helpful. Someone like that is going to think that, okay, well, at best, Islam is irrelevant. At best, it's irrelevant. At worst, it's something that Islam is something that's barbaric. It's immoral and it's irrational. So this is not really addressing doubts. This is not the kind of approach that inspires conviction, right, or yaqeen, or that kind of confidence. The approach that I take is that no, and this was the understanding of all the ulama, is that no, this kind of approach to sexual behavior, this is the only thing that makes sense, right? This is the pinnacle, this is the peak of wisdom. This is hikmah from Allah. Okay? The Creator has legislated this. And so He's legislated something that is perfect, something that is the best, something that is superior. Okay? This is a word that people are very sensitive about, superiority, superior. But this is something that Muslims have to have, right? This understanding. And it's not just lip service. It's not just, oh, we're superior, we're superior. No, it can be established. It can be debated. It can be discussed. It can be rationally argued. So this is what the Institute is meant to train Muslims to be able to do, to be able to argue and debate. And argue even with yourself. Like, an argument doesn't mean you go out and you're arguing with people. That's not what argument necessarily means. Argument even with yourself, even debating with yourself with an issue, because this is what having doubts means. You have this question, you have this issue that's just bothering you. It's getting under your skin, and you don't know how to address it. And so you're going back and forth with yourself. Why? And I know this because I went through it myself. And I went through, in learning about Islam, in studying Islam, these are the kinds of debates and questions I had myself. These are shubuhat that I had. And so I had to go through a process of arguing with myself and going back and forth and trying to understand an issue. And so this is what I went through. And over the years, I've tried to refine this process and create a curriculum to train others to be able to do this and to be successful at it. So this is another major aspect of what Alasna is about. So also let me just say something about how, let's see. Let me say something about how it's structured. So you subscribe to the Institute, okay? So that way you get access to the learning platform. And once you subscribe, you're paying a monthly fee, okay? It's $11 per month. And then all the courses, you'll have access to them. And they're on demand, you can take them whenever you want. The actual courses consist of lessons, so they're broken up into 6 to 10 to 15-minute videos. You watch the lecture, and then it's a video. You watch it, and then you take a quiz to test your knowledge, and then you progress through the course, and then you complete the course. The average course takes anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. And then you just go through a curriculum, through a path of courses, and they build on each other. So you can access any of the courses at any time. So this is a confusion that people have had. Some people have asked me. They think that, oh, I just sign up for a course and I pay for the course and that's it. No, you have access to all the courses. So there are many courses. There's going to be hours of content. Right now, for launch, there's 2 courses that are available. One is called Dark Storms, the Modernist Challenge to Islam. Dark Storms. So this is something that goes over modernity, progressivism, the conflict between modernism and Islam, how the source of doubts, where are all these doubts in Islam coming from within the modern period, how can we address them, and so forth. And so that's a very important course. Everyone who signs up for Alasna should, they really have to take that course because it lays the groundwork for everything else. Because when we talk about liberalism, secularism, women's rights, LGBT, slavery, things like wife beating in the Quran, all of these issues, you have to start by understanding modernity and progressivism and the root, of the conflict there. So You start with Dark Storms. That's available for students now. The other course that's available is Tortured Minds. Tortured Minds, the Fire of Muslim Doubt. So this course looks in depth at how language and thought are related and how Muslims today are using certain words and certain concepts affects the way that they think, and that can create doubts. And so we deep dive into this relationship between language and thought and modernist language. And we look at also a comparison of ethics between modernism and Islam, and how there are certain things that conflict and cause doubts in the minds of Muslims. So these two classes are available now. In a couple of weeks, inshallah, I'm planning in 2 or 3 weeks, we're gonna have a course on marriage and courtship. You know, the process of finding a husband or a wife. And this is something that I worked with. Actually, my wife Khalid is the one who's actually preparing this course, and so she's in charge of that. But we're going to teach it together, or it's more like I'm going to be the student, and I'm going to ask her and question some of the things she might say, and we'll have a good conversation. So that should be really fun, and that's going to be released inshallah in a few weeks. We're going to talk about things like arranged marriage, things like wali, what things to consider in finding husband and wife. There's a lot of confusion, I feel, in some corners of the Muslim community on the issue of marriage. And then the other course that's coming out next month is on atheism. So there's going to be, inshallah, several courses on atheism, and this is going to be the first course on atheism offered, inshallah. And so definitely you'll want to take that. We're going to take a deep look at the sources of atheism, what atheism amounts to, and just basically lay the ground for how to critique atheism, how to respond to the challenges of atheists in a very straightforward and real way. And also, I mean, one of the things about atheists is that they've developed a kind of they've developed sound bites, or they've developed certain ways of talking to the media to make religion look bad, and they say certain stupid things that we're going to address in one of the classes, inshallah, one of the courses, where we can understand, okay, well, they have their sound bites, we have our sound bites, we have ways to diffuse or to make them look stupid for the kinds of things that they say. Because that's pretty much the goal of so much of the new atheism. Like when you hear Richard Dawkins, someone like Richard Dawkins speak, one of these new atheists, or Sam Harris, so much of it is very shallow, and it's been tailor-made for a kind of social media or media audience where they just want to make theists look like idiots. They want to make religious people look dumb, especially Muslims. That's really their number one target, because as Muslims, we're the only ones who really we have a strong intellectual tradition that is completely, or is in most ways contradictory to the modernist paradigm. So, okay, fine, they want to make us look stupid. Well, okay, we can reciprocate. We can respond to that intellectually, and there's nothing wrong with that. So these are the courses that are coming up. And so that's just February, March, April, May, June. There's new courses that are going to, inshallah, continuously be coming out. A lot of it has already been recorded. It's just a process of editing it and making it nice, and there's new stuff that we're recording as well. So you're subscribing for $11 a month, but you're getting continuous new courses, new content, and we try to keep the cost as low as possible, so as many people as possible can subscribe and benefit from that, inshallah. Okay, so one other thing about the Institute, the way that the courses are structured, this is important to understand. There's 4 different categories: knowledge, reasoning, skills, and family. So those 4 categories. Knowledge just means understanding these modernist ideologies, secularism, liberalism, atheism, feminism, and so forth, understanding them in a practical way. Because I'm not interested in teaching you, some boring stuff about the history of, these different thinkers, and that's irrelevant to how modernism is challenging Muslim faith. So I make sure that the content is very direct to the issues that are causing doubts, because everyone has limited time. You're not trying to take a graduate course in philosophy. You're trying to take a course that is tailor-made to address the specific doubts, but you need to understand where the doubts are coming from. So whatever is necessary for that in understanding the history of these ideologies, that's what's going to come through and be conveyed in the courses. So you have knowledge, understanding these ideologies, understanding how to refute these ideologies. Okay, so in the correct way, in the way that I described earlier. So that's knowledge. That's one category of courses. The second category of courses is reasoning and logic. This is something that's so important and so crucial, because logic is something that is not taught. Is not taught within, at least in America, in American public schools. You don't have any courses on logic. You don't have any courses on reasoning. If you go to college, unless you take a logic class, you won't get that either. Unless you want to become a lawyer and you're taking the LSAT, you're not going to get basic logic and reasoning. How do you evaluate an argument? How do you read a paragraph or read a paper and understand what is being argued and how you can analyze that? And is it a valid argument? Is it a sound argument? Is it deductively sound, and so forth? So these are the kinds of skills that the population in general is lacking, and it's a big problem, because if you don't understand logic, then you're going to be at the mercy of propagandists. You're going to be at the mercy of politicians sweet talking you, or media influence you, indoctrinating you. So logic is very, 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 very important. And so there are courses that are purely dedicated to reasoning and making it, again, it's not just a boring logic class. It's something where you're taking the skills that you'll need to apply in a very practical way, inshallah. And then skills, that's the third category, skills, meaning writing skills. That's primarily what the courses address, is how to write effectively. And this is another thing that Muslims really need in this age. Writing is always going to be relevant. Writing kitaba is something that you're always going to need. So how do you write effectively? How do you argue effectively? Again, something that's not really taught well in schools. And I know because I experienced it. I went through public school. And so it's something that Muslims will definitely need if you are communicating with anyone, right? You don't have to be on social media, even, with family, through email, through any kind of discussion. How do you communicate effectively and properly to convey the right ideas? Communication is very, very critical, important, and writing is very important and critical. And then the fourth category, which Khalid is really the one who is focused on this, is family. Because you can have all of this practical, theoretical knowledge, whether theoretical or practical, but how do you apply it, and how do you actually make a difference for your own life and the life of your children, the life of your spouse, and so forth? So this is where things get real, because as it will come across in the courses, family is really the basic building block of society. Family is really something that is so critical. Strong families are something that's so critical to a healthy, functioning society. So many of the problems that we see in the modern world, so many of the diseases and maladies and the crime that we see in the world today, in the modern world, is because families have been dissolved. Families have been deconstructed and destabilized, overall destabilized. And this is creating misery, it's creating suffering for people in their individual lives, but it's also creating a society that is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And this is what modernity does. This is what some of these ideologies that we're going to talk about in the knowledge category, this is what they do. Okay, this is one of the many things that they do, is they destroy family. And we're going to look exactly at how this happens. And so practically, our ability to progress as a community critically depends on our ability to maintain strong, stable families. Okay, this is something that is so crucial. And there's a lot of practical things that come into that when it comes to tarbiyah, for children, when it comes to their education, their upbringing, when it comes to family ties, when it comes to how you connect and relate to members of your family, your parents, and so forth. So many things that Muslims, alhamdulillah, we have all of these values because the Sharia is emphasizing, Allah is emphasizing how important the family is. And this is something that the past generations understood and they took for granted because it was internalized. But now that those kinds of intuitions and those kinds of institutions have been obliterated by modernism, we have to, many of us, not all, many Muslims have to rebuild this kind of sense of family and what is the significance of family and how important family is for the ability to live a fulfilled life in this dunya and the ability actually to worship Allah, okay? To be good slaves of Allah and to achieve felicity, Jannah in the Akhirah, bi'ithnillah. So these are the 4 categories: knowledge, reasoning, skills, and family. 4 categories. All the courses fall in one of these categories. Okay, so that's all I want to cover for the Institute. Let me just address some questions. So one of the questions, are the courses pre-recorded? They are pre-recorded, but there are live sessions as well. So for enrolled students. So those will be announced through the platform itself. So when you register, you pay the enrollment fee, then you get a dashboard, and within that dashboard there are courses that you can see, and then there's also announcements that will be sent when you register. So whenever there's a live session that's scheduled, you'll get a notification or email, and then you can tune in and ask questions live, and that happens at least once a month for the students. And there's also discussion forums within the platform as well. So if you have a question on one of the lectures, on one of the lessons, you didn't quite get something, you can type a question and then other students can respond to it, or the instructor will respond as well to address that question. Okay, let's see. After this marriage course, will I be able to get married? Well, inshallah, we'll make dua for you to find someone that will really make you happy, inshallah, in this life and the next. Let's see. Jazakallah khairah, Asadullah, for your dua. Really appreciate that. Ameen, ameen. Okay. Someone is asking about the fee info, like what's the fee? So you can see it if you go to alasna.org. It explains the pricing structure, but it's basically $11 per month. $11 per month, flat fee, and you pay that on an annual basis, so it renews annually. You'll have to pay the lump sum for the entire year, which comes to $132. But that's $11 per month. If you want to go month by month, there's an option for that. If you don't want to commit for a whole year, you can also commit for just a month and that's $19. So it's more expensive if you just want to do it month to month. But yeah, and then, for people who are taking it and you don't like it, you can cancel it, and depending on how much of the courses you've done, you'll get a refund for that, for canceling. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you. Oh, so currently cannot see a detailed course outline. I think if the readers can see that, it would help them make up their mind. You can see a course outline. Maybe it's not, maybe the link is not accessible. I'll look into that, but there is a course outline for all of the courses that are published. It'll be on the site. So in the coming week or two, I'm going to have information posted on each of the courses that are online now, Dark Storms and Tortured Minds. I'm also going to put samples up of what the lecture is like, what we're talking about. And so you can decide on whether you want to join, inshallah, or not. Hopefully you will. Let me see. Okay, what book? I'm sorry. What book or website can I go to start understanding the scholarly tradition? Should I pick up Imam Bukhari's book on hadith? So this is an important question. It's kind of off topic a little bit, but I think it's important to address since I've mentioned scholarly tradition a few times. The correct way to understand the scholarly tradition is to sit with scholars and to study with scholars. And so there are many scholars in the US and also in the Western world generally. Every major city and many of the smaller cities will have masajid, and they'll have imams who are coming from overseas. Majority of them are, and they teach, and they have classes, and they have lessons. And so you should seek them out. And this is something that is virtuous, to go and seek knowledge, and Allah will reward that. And there's been so many statements of the Prophet ﷺ about the virtues of seeking knowledge. So these are the sources of knowledge. You're not going to be able to I'm not discouraging anyone from reading hadith, right? You should. And I did a lot of this, especially when I was in high school and early in college, is just pick up, a book of hadith and just read them one by one by one by one. And it's so enriching to just read the words of the Prophet ﷺ and to see the wisdom of what the Prophet ﷺ is saying, and reading the seerah, and all of these things are very important. But you're not going to really get a good grasp of what the Islamic intellectual tradition is unless you study with ulama. And it doesn't have to be like a huge commitment that, okay, I'm going to leave everything and I'm going to go travel to Egypt or go somewhere and really study. If you want to do that, that's great. But for the majority of people, they are not able to do that. So you can find scholars and imams who do have an understanding of the Islamic tradition. And so start with learning the fara'id, the fard ayn knowledge, the individually obligatory knowledge. What's necessary to be a Muslim? What's necessary for you to know and to do as a Muslim in terms of fiqh? How do you pray? What are the conditions of prayer? What are the pillars? What are the arkan of prayer, of salah, of tahara? Obviously, you start with tahara. How do you make wudu? How do you make ghusl? Like, when does your wudu break? All of these kinds of details are obligatory knowledge, because prayer, salah, the 5 pillars that you learn at a young age, These are obligatory. So you have to, if something is obligatory to do, it's obligatory. Fard, wajib, it's obligatory to know how to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, then you can't do it. So logically, you see the connection there. So start with the fara'id. So there's, when it comes to ibadat, worship. Then when it comes to aqidah, what is it obligatory to know about Allah? What's there that's obligatory to know about the angels, the malaika? What's obligatory to know about the messengers, about the kutub, the books of revelation, all of the pillars of iman, the 6 pillars of iman. This is obligatory knowledge. You need to know these basics. And so whatever it takes to go to a scholar, a real alim, to learn this, then it's obligatory to do that. Obligatory meaning if you don't do it, you're going to be considered sinful. You're going to be considered sinful if you don't do it. If you do it, then Allah will reward you. And there are so many virtues and benefits of pursuing knowledge. This is from the generosity of Allah, that even the things that are obligatory upon us, pursuing knowledge of them and doing them, these are the most beloved to Allah, and Allah rewards us for those things. It didn't have to be that way. Allah could have, said, okay, the obligatory things, those are, you have to do them. That's not as virtuous as going above and beyond and doing supererogatory and doing nawafil and mustahab and all of these other things that are above and beyond. That's where the cream of the crop. That's where the real hasanat. That's where the real reward lies. But no, Allah in His mercy and His generosity, He made the most beloved deeds, the most beloved things to Him, the obligatory actions, the obligatory ibadat, and so forth. So this is something that we are obligated to go study and learn. And so that's really the foundation of your traditional knowledge, your appreciation for the scholarly tradition. And then you can progress beyond that as much as you like. But yeah, beware of just thinking that if you read a book of hadith, or even just a book of tafsir by yourself, you're going to gain an appreciation of Islamic thought and the Islamic tradition. That's a pitfall that many fall into. And also, the other important thing about going and actually learning from scholars is that so much of knowledge is not something that can be contained in a text. Right? We talk about this in some of the courses, is that not all knowledge is propositional. That's the word. Not all knowledge is propositional. Not all knowledge can be contained in a text or can be written down. Certain things you have to just see. Certain things you just have to experience. Certain things you just have to take from being in the company of someone. This is suhbah. This is suhbah. When you have the concept of the Sahaba, what makes the Sahaba the Sahaba? They're the Sahaba because they were companions of the Prophet ﷺ. They were in his company, and so much of what they took were from his ﷺ, from his akhlaq, from his adab, from the way he carried himself, from the way he walked, from the way he talked, from the way he, even his hand gestures. The Prophet ﷺ, went point like this. He would gesture with his whole hand. So these are something that you wouldn't be able to find. Some of these subtleties, you won't be able to get that in a book. And even if it were in a book, you wouldn't be able to imbibe it. You wouldn't be able to take it on by just reading it. Or you need the influence of someone's company, good company. So this is something that's so critical to the Islamic intellectual tradition. It wasn't just theory in a book. There is that, of course, but so much of what a student of knowledge takes is from the adab, the akhlaq of his teacher, from the ulama. They're the inheritors of the prophets, plural. So we take from them in terms of their knowledge and in terms of their manners, how to live and how to be in the world, how to be with others. This is so critical for our salvation. So that's what I would say about the Islamic tradition. How is the scheduling of the classes? So it's completely on demand. Going back to Alasna, it's completely on demand. You can just, once you enroll, you can start a course on the weekend, and then if you get busy because of work or school, then you leave it and then come back to it next weekend or whenever. It's completely on demand. You just go to the course portal, you go to your dashboard, you sign in, and then press play. That's it. You press play, and then you go through the lessons and then do the quizzes, do the exercises, and there are exercises too within the courses. So if you want to enrich yourself and reinforce your understanding and get a good grasp, a deep grasp, and do the exercises, and then inshallah, it can take you a week to finish a course. It can take you a day. It can take you 2 months. It doesn't matter, whatever fits your schedule. So how can one be convinced that the knowledge in these courses are valid? Yeah, I mean, there are, like I said, testimonials from actual scholars who have taken the course. There have been the content itself, parts of it have been approved by scholars. So this is, valid and Islamically sound. I've also studied Islamic knowledge traditionally as well. I'm not a sheikh. I'm not an alim, but you can read those testimonials and you can take the courses and you can see. And as far as the validity of the aspects that touch on modernity and modernism and liberalism and secularism and so forth, this is what I studied at Harvard. This is, my educational background is in philosophy, physics and philosophy. So I studied these in depth at Harvard with, some of the top philosophers in the world. So it's valid from that aspect as well. And again, if you're skeptical of that, you can just look on my website. You can look at my social media. There's going to be actual samples that are posted from the lectures, and judge for yourself. Like if you think it's valid or not, or if it's beneficial or not, please feel free. Okay. Yeah, so someone is asking, there are currently 2 courses available. Are more courses coming soon? Yes, like I mentioned, there's 2 courses currently available, Dark Storms and Tortured Minds. There's going to be 2 more coming in February, inshallah. And then every month after that, inshallah, new courses, new content. You'll always have access to those, and you can take them on demand as you need. Okay. So. Okay, I think I've addressed all the questions. Okay, barakallahu fikum. Again, check out alasna.org and let me know if you have any questions. You can email info@alasna.org. If you have any questions on anything there, feel free to email. You can also message me on Facebook. Sometimes I'm not as responsive on Facebook messaging, but I'll try to get to your message as soon as I can. Also, like I said, I'm trying to do this kind of, I guess it's not really a podcast, but it's a live show or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to try to do that on a weekly basis. So I'm thinking about Tuesday nights at this time, but if there's other times that make more sense and more people are available, we can be flexible with that and figure out the best time. But inshallah, I want to do this more regularly, inshallah, and get a chance to talk to you and interact with you as well. Okay. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.